Hello there, I'm Lady Lawyer. You can catch me on Fridays on Lovers Rock Radio for nostalgic vibes. This Friday it's going to be Roots Rockers. And on Saturday, 7 till 9 on Gold Standard Radio. And I'm going to be following the same theme. Anyway, I wanted to tell you about another dream I had. This is the third dream I've had with such clarity that gave me a message that I wanted to share with you. So let's get on with it because, as you know, I've got to start work in 10 minutes and this actually takes 10 minutes to read. So it's about boundaries and decisions. I think one of the hardest things we have to learn as human beings is that we are allowed to change our minds about people, situations, and relationships without first putting them on trial. And I was thinking about this because of the dream I had last night. I'm not going to waste 10 minutes telling you about my dream, but the crux of it was that there was a man crossing a boundary with my daughter. There was a thoughtful man who came bearing gifts, and there were animals congregating outside my daughter's kitchen. There was something I took from it that I thought was worth sharing because I think it applies to so many of us. The lesson was about boundaries, but not the usual version of boundaries where somebody has done something dreadful and we finally say, right, that's it, you're out. I'm talking about the much more difficult boundary, the one where somebody hasn't necessarily done anything terrible. They're actually quite nice, they've made an effort, they've been thoughtful, they may even have gone out of their way for you, and yet something inside you says, no, I don't want this. Now, what do we do with that? Because many of us have been taught directly or indirectly that if somebody has been good to us, we owe them something in return. And sometimes we turn kindness into a contract without even realizing it. Someone does something lovely for us and we think, well, I can't possibly disappoint them. Someone has made an effort and we think, I suppose I should give them a chance. Someone wants something from us and we think, well, I don't have a good enough reason to say no. And that last one is the one that usually catches us out. I don't have a good enough reason. Who decided that we need a prosecuting case before we're allowed to decline something? Sometimes I don't want to is the information. It's not necessarily selfishness. It's not necessarily fear. It's not necessarily avoidance. Sometimes it is simply your internal system telling you, this isn't right for me. And I'm not suggesting we should all walk around responding to every uncomfortable feeling by slamming doors in people's faces, because feelings can be wrong. We can misunderstand people. We can be frightened of things because of previous experiences. We can make assumptions. So discernment still matters. But there is another mistake we make. And that is assuming that if we cannot prove that somebody is wrong for us, then they might be right for us. Then they must be right for us. And that's not true either. Somebody doesn't have to be a bad person for you not want to be in a relationship with them. They don't have to be toxic. They don't have to have betrayed you. They don't even have to have cheated. They don't have to have shouted at you. They don't have to have done anything that would make an excellent episode or a daytime drama. They simply do not have. They may simply not be for you. And I think that's particularly difficult for empathetic people to grasp a notion of because they don't only experience their own feelings or emotions, but they immediately start imagining the other person's feelings. I'll hurt them. They'll think I'm rejecting them. They'll be disappointed. They've made such an effort. And before you know it, you're no longer asking yourself, what do I want? You're asking, how can I make my decision painless for everybody else? And I've got news for you. You can't. You can be kind, you can be considerate, you can explain yourself, you can avoid deliberately humiliating somebody, but you cannot make every boundary you set comfortable for the person on the other side of it. Some are going to be disappointed. Some are going to misunderstand you. Some may even think you're being unfair. And that is where we have to learn something rather uncomfortable. Someone being hurt by your boundary or decision does not automatically mean you have hurt them. There is a difference. If I say no and you feel disappointed, I haven't necessarily done something harmful to you. You are allowed to have your feelings, and I'm allowed to make a decision. Both things can exist at the same time. I think we sometimes confuse being a good person with being a person who doesn't disappoint anybody. Those are two entirely different things. You can be a loving person and still disappoint somebody. You can be generous and still say no. You can care about someone and still decide that they don't have access to every part of your life. You can appreciate somebody's effort and still say thank you, but this is not what I want. And perhaps one of the greatest forms of maturity is learning not to turn somebody else's disappointment into evidence against yourself. Because here's another thing I've noticed. When we are uncomfortable with our own boundaries, we sometimes start negotiating against ourselves. We say, well, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should give them another chance. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm being selfish. And that is why self-reflection is valuable. But sometimes we're not. Sometimes we're simply experiencing the unfamiliar feeling of choosing ourselves without having to justify it through somebody else's wrongdoing. And that can feel surprisingly uncomfortable, especially if you've spent years being the person who accommodates, understands, helps, rescues, smooths things over, and thinks about everybody else's feelings before your own. When you've lived like that for a long time, a healthy boundary can initially feel like cruelty. It isn't. It may simply feel unfamiliar, and I think there's another part of this that we don't talk about enough. Boundaries are not only about keeping bad things out, they're also about making room for the things that genuinely belong. If I fill every available space in my life with obligations, expectations, other people's needs and relationships, and I don't really want, then when something meaningful comes along, where does it go? There's no room. And that's why boundaries aren't the enemy of intimacy. Sometimes they're what makes intimacy possible. I don't have to abandon myself to accommodate another person, and I don't have to become so fiercely independent that nobody can get close to me either. There is a middle ground, and perhaps that's what growing older teaches us. If we're willing to learn it, we don't have to keep every person simply because they have a history with us. We don't have to accept every invitation simply because we've been invited. We don't have to continue every relationship simply because it once mattered. And we certainly don't have to remain uncomfortable simply because somebody else has become comfortable with having access to us. We can ask ourselves, do I really want this? Not, can I justify saying no? Not, will they be upset? Not, what will people think? Just, do I want this in my life? And then we have to be honest enough to listen to the answer, because perhaps the food for the heart today is you're not required to make somebody a villain in order to give yourself permission to walk away. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for another person is not to give them false hope. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop explaining why your no needs to be acceptable to somebody else. There is a great deal of freedom in learning that those two statements are not the same thing. And that's today's food for the heart. Take what nourishes you, leave what doesn't. And in the meantime, take care of yourself and take care of each other. So you might wonder to yourself, how did you get all of that out of a dream? I don't know. I'm quite evaluative. I'm quite contemplative. I'm quite reflective. I often think about what's going on in my conscious world. And then when I have a dream, it seems to echo it in such a different way that I don't explain. I don't understand. So sometimes I seek interpretations, and that's what I come up with. And when I think it's a valuable lesson for myself, I always think this must be a valuable lesson for someone else. And that's why I've shared it with you. So that's all for now. So like I said before, take care of yourself, take care of each other. And until the next time, this was Food for the Heart today. And I'm Lady Loy. Bye.